This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have a fantastic show today. We're going to be covering a lot of topics. Before we get to the actual topics, it's important to note that we have passed an auspicious day on May 15th, marks the 77th anniversary of the commemoration of the Palestinian Nakba, or catastrophe. It commemorates 77 years when 800,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed and ethnically cleansed from their homes and villages. From 1947 to 1949, 500 villages were depopulated. Ethnic cleansing started. Murders happened by Israeli paramilitary forces at the time. And here we are 77 years later, Jamal, with an unending struggle of an attempt by Israel to ethnically cleanse Palestine. We're here 77 years later. It's important to commemorate that. But to some of the other stories that we're covering today, Ben Cohen, the founder, one of the co-founders rather of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, was dragged out of a Senate hearing in DC for pointing out, that there's a genocide going on in Gaza. He was dragged out, detained, and the video of it is quite remarkable. In another story, there was an NYU student who was speaking at a commencement address at NYU. His name was Logan Roses, and he denounced Israeli genocide in his speech. And as a result, NYU has decided to withhold his diploma, really, really honoring free speech and the First Amendment. We'll be covering that today. And of course, we need to cover the fact that the Democrats seem to be going crazy, Jamal, about Donald Trump receiving a $400 million gift from the Qatari government to provide him with an airplane for Air Force One. So here we see the hypocrisy, Jamal, where Democrats are willing to criticize a $400 million gift from Qatar, but refuse to say anything about AIPAC and its surrogates giving tens of millions of dollars to U.S. elections. The hypocrisy reeks. Before we get to all that, Jamal, we're going to watch a really great interview that you did with Susan Akram. She's a clinical professor and director of the International Human Rights Clinic at Boston University Law School. She co-authored an opinion piece in The Guardian entitled, "We Are Human Rights Lawyers. Our new report is clear. Israel is perpetuating apartheid." It's a really excellent interview. We're going to watch that first, Jamal.
That's right, Jess. So we will watch this interview and then we'll go to our discussion. But again, I think it's very important to remember the 77 years of the ongoing Nakba. Let's watch Susan. On May 15, 4 human rights lawyers from esteemed academic institutions published a report in the University Network for Human Rights titled Apartheid in Israel, an analysis of Israel's laws and policies and the responsibilities of U.S. academic and other institutions. These lawyers have collectively taught thousands of classes on human rights and international law and defended and advocated for the human rights of vulnerable classes of people globally. Their report methodically demonstrates why Israel's laws and policies towards Palestinians meet the legal threshold of the definition of apartheid. This established, it then examines what the obligations of higher academic institutions are towards a country committing the crimes of apartheid and why, instead of being punished, students and others protesting it should be protected under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Human Rights Defenders. Joining us on Arab Talk today to summarize this important report is one of the co-authors, Susan Akram. She's a clinical professor and director of the International Human Rights Clinic at Boston University School of Law. Welcome to Arab Talk, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Firstly, I want to recognize your co-authors on this comprehensive analysis. Who are they and what are their affiliations?
Yes, so Professor Sandra Babcock is a professor at Cornell University, and she directs the Human Rights Clinic at Cornell. Professor Jim Cavallaro is the former rapporteur of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and was the president of the commission. He has been a professor at Yale University, at Harvard, and directs the University Network for Human Rights, along with Thomas, who teaches at Columbia University and also teaches human rights.
The report states that it is not the first one to detail why Israel's laws and policies vis-à-vis the Palestinians constitute apartheid, and its references to these other studies are abundant. Why did you and your colleagues think this report was important at this particular time?
Yes, the work of this report involved examining all of those other prior reports and research on apartheid in Israel-Palestine. And we looked at some 25 reports and research studies. And what was not done until now was looking at the trajectory of apartheid that led to what we concluded last year in a separate report is genocide that is being carried out now in Gaza. So this is the first of the reports that takes us through to the present time and examines that history of apartheid leading up to and partially explaining, I would say to a great deal explaining, the genocide in Gaza.
Your report adheres to the legal definition of apartheid set forth by the 1973 United Nations International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. People historically understand apartheid as the racial segregation as we witnessed in South Africa. What are the specifics used to define the crime of apartheid by the UN Convention?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. In the popular mind, apartheid is associated specifically with South Africa, but the Apartheid Convention makes no such restriction. It basically defines apartheid in Article 2 as a series of inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination of one racial group of persons over any other racial group and systematically oppressing them. The definition goes on then to describe the kinds of specific acts that are covered by this definition, denying members of the group the right to life and liberty by murder or the infliction of serious bodily or mental harm, by arbitrary arrest and illegal imprisonment. And then a separate category is the deliberate imposition on the group of living conditions calculated to cause their physical destruction in whole or in part. And then it goes on to describe the kinds of acts that are covered by that category. So our report goes through the definition quite methodically and looks at the available evidence under each of those elements and concludes that basically every one of the elements is met here in the situation of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians.
You and your colleagues organized the ways in which apartheid is manifested in Israel in this report. The lead section is entitled Human Rights Organizations and Experts Concur that Israel's laws and policies are designed to ensure the dominance of Jewish Israelis over Palestinians. Isn't this the crux of everything? I mean, give some examples of how Palestinians are denied the most fundamental rights, for example, residency, access to water, participation in political, economic, social, and cultural rights.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the foundations of the apartheid system were established even before the creation of the State of Israel, in the pre-statal Zionist organizations that were established, the Jewish Agency and the Jewish National Fund, that were established to obtain for Jews. And the very first, again, even before the creation of the State of Israel, there were provisional laws put in place to, once Palestinians were expelled, to expropriate their lands. And many people are familiar with Plan Dalet, Plan D, which was put in place and carried out by the Zionist militias to clear the areas of heavy populations of Palestinians, to clear and expel Palestinians and prevent their return. And we know that Dayan gave the green light to Plan that for all of the combined militias to carry that out. Following the creation of the state, one of the earliest laws, the 1950 law, the Law of Return, gave exclusive rights to Jews from anywhere in the world to return, and I say that in quotes, to return to Palestine, to Israel, a place where they had never been and never lived. And of course, to become nationals of the state. And then in 1952, in the Citizenship Nationality Law, Israel specifically denationalized Palestinians. And of course, did not give them the same superior nationality rights that the series of laws that began in 1950 and then have since continued to the 2018 law, nation-state law, have all entrenched, which is a specific superior national status for Jews and a citizenship status for some Palestinians, and no status for Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory in terms of national rights.
The report continues with a section distinguishing between before October 7 and after October 7. The report's executive summary states, the crime of apartheid also provides a legal framework for assessing Israel's actions since October 7, 2023. This is the first report to undertake that action. Why is this important?
Well, the public perception is that everything can be explained in terms of what's happening in Gaza as Israeli self-defense for what occurred on October 7th. And what we are showing is that it is a continuation of the apartheid policies. It is perhaps the most brutal phase of the apartheid policies that began, as I said, before the creation of the Israeli state. Now, well before October 7th, Gaza had been under siege for 17 years, since the election of Hamas in 2006 and the placement of a siege and limits on access of goods and people traveling into and out of Gaza. Already the Gazan economy had been completely disintegrated by the restrictions on entry and exit. And that, again, is only part of the explanation of the kind of apartheid, discriminatory apartheid policies that affected Palestinians in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and in Gaza, in terms of, as you had mentioned, access to water, access to land, access to the ability to have business, the permit system, the incredibly restrictive permit system that places such restrictions on movement for Palestinians, and of course, no such restrictions exist for Jewish Israelis or settlers, Jewish settlers.
In May 2024, you and these same colleagues were together to publish a report which you mentioned, Genocide in Gaza. through the same network. Did the crisis of the genocide necessitate that it takes priority over a report on Israel's apartheid, or had you thought of this report as a follow-up to reinforce the overall case demonstrating Israel's war crimes?
Yes, so we have been working together as a consortium now of human rights clinics for some time, and we have worked on a number of different submissions to the United Nations treaty bodies and the Human Rights Council. And so we have been talking about what are the important gaps in the research and public awareness of the situation in Israel, Palestine, that we as a collective can work together to fill. So these were two large areas where we felt we should add our systematic research, our ability to use students and each other's knowledge to add to the information and to debunk some of the myths that have prevailed about what is happening and about this particular conflict.
Right. There are two important parts to this report. The first is the thorough analysis that concludes Israel is committing apartheid. The report then takes up the question of academic responsibility in a section entitled Universities are Actors with Human Rights Obligations Under International Law. Talk about this.
Yes, we've been particularly concerned about what has been happening on our campuses since October 7th. Now, many of us, of course, who have worked on Israel-Palestine for years, in my case, decades, have experienced harassment and threats and a range of measures trying to silence us and our work. But we have never seen the kind of pushback, repression that students and faculty have been facing since October 7th for speaking out about the facts and the truth about Palestine. Our students have been incredibly courageous in establishing encampments, in protesting, in making their voices heard about what they're seeing on social media, the live streaming of a genocide in front of their eyes. And instead of respecting the rights of these students to name the truth, to call out the responsibility of our governments, of our institutions, the universities have been cracking down on students, denying them their right to graduate, putting disciplinary proceedings, charging them with disciplinary proceedings, allowing them to be arrested on campus and charged with criminal charges, and instead of protecting them, being part of repressing them. So we felt it was really important and a responsibility, a special responsibility that we have as academics to protect the right of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of expression on our campuses, because if we don't have those rights on campuses, we certainly don't have them anywhere else.
I mean, as you've mentioned, in these repressive times, students, teachers, other activists are being punished and criminalized for protesting Israel's genocides and violations of Palestinian human rights. In a just situation, what should be taking place?
Well, in the first place, at a bare minimum, universities should be allowing students to protest and for students to raise their voices and for us to be able to teach the history and the human rights norms, just as we can teach almost any other subject on campus. Students should be allowed to mobilize, to organize groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, which have been among the leading voices on our campuses.
Right.
And the Jewish Students for Palestine, instead of forcing them to disband and arresting them. The universities are supposed to be an environment of free exchange of information If someone does not like someone else's speech, the cure for that is more speech, not less speech, and certainly not repression of any speech. But we go a bit farther in our report in calling out our institutions, our academic institutions, for, to some degree, a great degree in some cases, complicity with the apartheid and the genocide measures of Israel, because many of our academic institutions are getting funding for work that they are doing with Israeli institutions that assist in the military, in all of the military actions, the technology for sure. MIT has huge contracts with the Israeli military, as well as Cornell. And we believe that our institutions should not, at a minimum, should not be supporting and be complicit with what we call jus cogens, or customary international law, peremptory legal violations. And in fact, we call on our universities to divest from their ties, and particularly the military ties and the technology military ties that they have with Israel.
Just recently, a student at NYU, Logan Roses, denounced Israel's genocide in Gaza during his graduation speech, and now we learn that in retaliation, NYU has withheld his diploma. Is there a disconnect between the administration and its faculty and its students? I mean, is this what's going on?
I would say that's a big part of the problem. Almost on all of our campuses, students and faculty have mobilized to protect free speech, to protect the right to protest. And administrations have distanced themselves from the calls of the students and faculty, calls for divestment, calls for allowing the freedom of expression when it comes to Palestine. And as you mentioned, in many cases, have withheld diplomas and engaged in other kinds of retaliatory actions for students for expressing their feelings about what is happening, which they have an absolute right to do. So there is definitely a disconnect, and it is part of that disconnect that we are trying to address in the recommendations that we have in our report.
I mean, I'm going to take it a little bit further. Students historically had something to say during graduation. Let's assume the same student denounced something else, repression of the Uyghurs in China, or talked something about the LGBTQ community, etc. There are so many causes around the world, right? Would he have been, his diploma, would he have been retaliated against? Or is it just a question of Palestine?
Well, it's hard to know because every school has its own regulations and restrictions on, what is the appropriate time, place, and manner for certain types of speech. And there is flexibility and discretion in academic institutions in that regard. However, we call this the Palestine exception for a reason. I mean, I have represented and worked with and advocated for refugees and displaced people and stateless people all over the world. And the only issue on which I have received threats and harassment is about Palestine. And I think that's true of many of my colleagues who work in this area. We can challenge any state in the world, including the United States, and not get the kind of pushback and as I said, harassment and threats as we do when we work on Palestine.
In the opinion piece in The Guardian announcing your report, you and your colleagues state that although you welcome criticism and debate, under the current political climate, You expose yourselves to harassment and even risk losing your jobs. You all then ask, but if we silence ourselves on Palestine, how can we call ourselves human rights defenders? What has the reaction been so far?
Well, I've certainly received a lot of support from colleagues who have been following this issue, and very, very supportive response. I'm waiting for the other foot to fall or the other shoe to fall, because I've had over the years lots and lots of doxing, harassing, and even death threats for my work on Palestine. I am at the point in my career where I feel like it is more important than ever for me to speak out and for me to raise my voice because of the decades of experience and knowledge that I have. It's my duty, it's my responsibility. And as we said in the Guardian piece, this is why we are human rights lawyers. You're not human rights lawyers when it's performative. You're human rights lawyers when the going gets tough and when we have to stand in the shoes of our Palestinian colleagues and friends who are disappearing, being tortured, being killed every day, in fact. And we don't have the luxury of being silent.
Where can people access this report and read it in its entirety?
It's available on the University Network for Human Rights website, and UNHR has also done a Twitter thread linking the report, and it will soon be up on the Boston University International Human Rights Law Clinic website. We're still going through the mechanics of getting it up there, but I also think it's available on the Cornell Human Rights Clinic website.
Susan Akram, thank you for coming on Arab Talk, and thank you for working on this very important report.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That's the voice and the face of Susan Akram. She's a clinical professor and director of the International Human Rights Clinic at Boston University, speaking about the opinion piece that she put in The Guardian about human rights lawyers. I have to say it, Jamal, again, reaffirming that Israel is perpetuating apartheid. How many times do we have to hear from human rights attorneys and organizations that Israel is committing apartheid in addition to the ethnic cleansing, Jamal? But Susan's opinion piece in The Guardian remains very powerful.
Yeah, this is, I would say, several people worked on this, which Susan Crum discusses, but it also examines all these organizations, the findings, I should say, of all these organizations from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, etc., and before that and after that, but also it also looks into new findings since October 7th of 2023.
Yeah,
it's a very, very, I would say, well-researched paper that people should look at it, and it has 4 human rights attorneys who collaborated together to come, and they came together to come with this conclusion. Moving on to Jess, which is you've mentioned early on. Actually, just I should mention that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib reintroduced Resolution 409 recognizing the Nakba and Palestinian refugees' rights. As we all know, the date is May 15th for the commemoration of the Nakba, which marked the 77th anniversary of it. The Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, refers to the mass expulsion and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from their homes and homeland during the creation of the State of Israel, 1947 to 1949. But the Nakba did not end in 1948 and continues to this day, as we're seeing what's happening in real time streamed, on the internet as Israeli forces commit genocide in Gaza.
Well, Jamal, it's extraordinary that after 77 years, an unending, complete line of ethnic cleansing and attempts to uproot indigenous Palestinians from historic Palestine has never stopped. And that's kind of the point of where we are today in the commemoration of the 77 years of the Nakba. I mean, it's important, and I'm hoping that our viewers and listeners understand that the commemoration marks a focal historical moment when that ethnic cleansing began by initially Jewish paramilitary groups and eventually continued after the State of Israel was created and has continued nonstop. And we have many historical kind of moments that we want to reflect on, including obviously what happened in 48, what happened in 67, what happened with the first and second intifadas, the blockade of Gaza in 2005, and now the 5 wars, including the current genocide and extreme ethnic cleansing and annihilation of Palestinian existence that's going on right now, Jamal. So this is a very poignant moment, and we don't have time to talk about it today, obviously, but attempts to uproot Palestinians remain profoundly active, either by the Israeli military, which has just started its next grotesque campaign. They killed 100 people in the last 24 hours. There's a news report that the United States and Israel are speaking with Libya to displace 1 million Palestinians from Gaza and take them to Libya. I mean, the craziness of this ethnic cleansing and this genocide, Jamal, is really, really intense. And here we are 77 years later.
And on this topic, the topic of genocide, and of course, the Nakba, which is also there are attempts also to deny it.
Yeah, Nakba denial.
Nakba denial. But anyway, our next topic just is, I think it's very important, and just gives you examples of what's going on. Ben Cohen, the co-founder of Ben and Jerry's, very popular ice cream, was arrested during a protest in the U.S. Senate over military aid to Israel and humanitarian conditions in Gaza. He and other protesters disrupted the hearing this couple of days ago, while Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was testifying. Mr. Cohen was charged with a misdemeanor offense, and while another 6 demonstrators were also arrested and face a number of more serious charges. And we saw the video, everybody saw the video,
Right.
which was shared on social media, showing Mr. Cohen being escorted from the building by police with his hands tied behind his back, and he was screaming, "Congress kills poor kids in Gaza by buying bombs and pays for it by kicking kids off Medicaid in the United States." And as he was getting dragged out, from the building, the police charged, or a police spokesperson said that Mr. Cohen was charged with crowding, obstructing, or incommoding, a misdemeanor offense which used in civil disobedience cases in the U.S. Capitol. I mean,
unbelievable.
This is where we're at now, that you just can't lobby on behalf of children who are being slaughtered without getting arrested.
Yeah. And the hypocrisy, right, that the United States continues to supply Israel with billions of dollars of military support, 2,000-pound bombs, supporting the genocide in Gaza right now. And yet, when American citizens, and it's important to note that, Ben Cohen obviously is a Jewish American, and he's speaking on behalf of, what he believes very deeply is this immoral crime of genocide and supporting the murder of Palestinian children. He's the one that gets arrested, not Benjamin Netanyahu, not the, group of Israeli military officials who've been charged, with genocide and are under indictment by the International Criminal Court. So the hypocrisy and the irony here is not lost on anyone, Jamal.
Well, Itamar Ben-Gvir just a couple of weeks ago was touring the United States here.
Freely.
Freely. Congress, going to college campuses, etc. And of course, he was met with demonstrators, but that was acceptable, even though he, in Israel, was arrested before. I mean, he, in Israel,
Right.
for many people, is considered, a terrorist because he supports, basically the expulsion of Palestinians, and he's a big admirer of Meir Kahane. I mean, and Goldstein, who murdered Palestinians in Hebron. But people have short memories, I guess.
Let's arrest Ben Cohen for protesting, and important to realize, protesting nonviolently, which is his right as a tax-paying American citizen to go to this hearing and to, demand, some sort of accountability for what's happening in Gaza right now. It's an extraordinary example of hypocrisy.
And on this topic also,
Speaking of it,
an NYU student, Logan Roses, denounced Israel's genocide in Gaza during his graduation speech. In retaliation, right, NYU has withheld his diploma. I don't know, Jess, but I've had with our guest asked her a question about this, and of course she's a law professor, and said, let's change the topic about the discussing Palestine or genocide in Gaza. Had this young student, Logan Roses, talked about the China, for example, and its treatment of its Muslim minority, the Uyghurs, had he talked about the LGBTQ community rights globally, in any country, pick any country you want in the world except for Israel, what would have been the reaction? I mean, because
he would have been celebrated.
Because the university says, the way they're laying it out, that's not the venue to take on political issues, and that he didn't clear his topic with the university. I don't know about the rules or university rules on campuses. What can these graduates talk about? But obviously he was selected because, I mean, not everyone gets to talk, right? Obviously he was selected by his peers, by his professors. He's a good student, whatever. I mean, he just wasn't randomly selected.
Exactly.
Just. And then now the university is punishing him that he cannot get his degree. I don't understand it, to tell you the truth. I mean, I don't understand how administrations are now acting as the police or the global police to basically muzzle criticism of Israel or any government for that matter. And the thing about it, just if the university deleted his profile, but some, of course, you could find it on the website. In the case that he studied cultural criticism and political economy.
I love it.
That's his major. That indicate he studied cultural criticism and political economy. So if you can't talk about politics and you cannot talk about criticism at the university, where can you talk about it?
Well, this is part of the larger effort, Jamal, by AIPAC and its surrogates and the Trump administration through the School of Education and through, the directives, the executive directives coming from Trump that basically are using and weaponizing anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel against universities. And universities have been told basically that if you criticize Israel, that you're being, and you criticize the genocide, you're being anti-Semitic de facto. So we see this sweeping across universities, and NYU is,
I should interrupt you here for 1 second, Jess. he did not mention Israel. He didn't even mention that because
Exactly.
he didn't mention. He just talked about the genocide. He talked about children getting killed. He didn't even go and mention.
Well, criticizing the genocide is considered anti-Semitic now, Jamal. This is part of the Trump administration, the ADL, AIPAC, and their attempts to weaponize any criticism of Israel as being de facto anti-Semitic. And so NYU is one of the worst perpetrators of this, and we have to call it what it is, Jamal. It's anti-Palestinian racism. If you talk about Palestine, if you talk about the genocide, you're going to be labeled as anti-Semitic, and this is just yet another example. I don't know about Logan Rose's background, but if he's not Palestinian, which I'm just assuming that he's not, but he's not. You could see that anti-Palestinian racism affects not just Palestinians, but Palestinians and people who are trying to speak on genocide or on behalf of Palestinian human rights. So it's getting very aggressive in the academic circles right now, and people are like Mr. Rosos they're all being viciously attacked.
So, predictably, Trump's opponents in the Democratic Party
It's a hilarious story, Jamal.
slammed the president after he indicated he would accept a luxury jet from the Qatari royal family. The Qatari royal family plans to give, I guess, to donate a luxury Boeing 747-8, estimated to be worth $400 million, to the U.S., by the way, Department of Defense, not in the name of Donald Trump, but to the U.S. Department of Defense to be used as part of a fleet of planes dubbed Air Force One, because the current fleet, which basically the 747, well, actually it's Trump uses, or the presidents, any president of the United States, they use two 747-200 jets, which have been in use since 1990.
Yeah, they're like almost 40 years old.
Exactly. So Qatar said, okay, we're donating this brand new jet, luxury jet, and still has to be retrofitted, I guess, and upgraded to become an Air Force One, with all the communications, etc. And then later on, it will be transferred to Trump's presidential library at the end of his term. So there, the Democrats are flowing off the handle, basically, over this jet. They even, according to some news reports that I've read, that the Democratic National Committee flew its own aircraft over Trump's Florida resort, Mar-a-Lago, towing a mocking banner reading Qatar-a-Lago. I mean, look how silly they are. Really.
Jamal, not only silly, but this shows you why the Democrats are losing. This shows you why the Democrats, no one votes for them. This shows you why the Democrats have lost power. And it shows you how utterly infantile they are. They want to scream about this, Jed, whatever, but ignore cuts to Medicaid, cuts to Medicare, money to Israel, funding a genocide, Palestinian children being murdered by U.S. weapons. They will never scream about that, but they want to scream about this airplane. You know what I say to the Democrats, Jamal? Bring it on, man. Go for it. You're just going to dig yourself deeper into a hole and you will never get elected again. So they continue this path, Jamal, of self-destruction, it seems.
So they're not talking about what's happening in Gaza, most of them, some of them, but the majority.
Most are not.
They're still accepting donations from AIPAC.
Exactly.
They're not criticizing those who accept AIPAC donation. Tens of millions of dollars are donated during elections, and much more during the U.S. presidential elections. That's okay, because the thing is, the Qatari government had to go out and say there are no strings attached. we are good partners with the United States. We buy a lot of billions of dollars worth of hardware from the United States, and we just sign deals. There are no strings attached. But explain to me that there are no strings attached when you accept a donation from AIPAC.
Exactly. Well, I would call it not a string attached with AIPAC money, Jamal. It's more like a noose. When you take money from AIPAC, it's a noose around your neck. I'd also like to remind Democrats who are foaming at the mouth about this that the United States, the largest airbase, military airbase in the Middle East, might be one of the largest in the world, is in Qatar. It is in Qatar. So, the idea somehow, getting all up in arms about, oh, Qatar this and Qatar that. And, the United States has a deep strategic connection to Qatar, deep. And we don't have time to go into all of the relationships that the United States has with Qatar, but it's a deep, enduring kind of strategic and intelligence relationship they've had with the Qataris. And they want to focus their attention on this. As I said, it's another losing battle. They will dig themselves deeper into this hole of continuing to undermine their ability to govern. It's actually, Jamal, when I read all the Democrats who were screaming about this, I felt sorry for how ridiculous they sounded. It was really insulting.
And who's helping them amplify this? The low-rating CNN and other networks.
Yes.
That's what it's like, wall-to-wall coverage since he basically went to Qatar.
Yeah.
And again, they're not talking about the genocide. They're not. They never dare to talk about AIPAC and the corruption that goes with it. But they focus about this, even though now they've prompted supposedly an investigation by Attorney General Pam Bondi. The legality of the deal was determined that there is no since there are no explicit conditions attached, it would not amount to a bribe, because they're saying that's a bribe. And again, it's going to be donated to the Department of Defense. And it's crazy. That's like the big story of the week.
Yeah, it's the big story, Jamal, not the fact that Israel hasn't reinvaded Gaza again. 100 more people were killed just in the last 24 hours, hospitals being destroyed, threats to evacuate, ethnically cleanse, displace 1 million more Palestinians into Libya. None of the starvation of Palestinian children, the Nakba. I mean, none of that is being discussed, Jamal. They're focusing on an airplane. And I say to the Democrats, keep shooting yourself in the foot. You deserve everything you get, and you're a failing party. So you're doing a lot of damage to this country.
Just last comment, wasn't the Statue of Liberty a gift from France?
Well, maybe we should return it, Jamal. Maybe we should return the Statue of Liberty.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.